What is up, everybody? Welcome to the Week 9 edition of the Pro Football Focus Fantasy Show here on RotoGrinders. I'm Andy Means. I'm not Britt Devine. Britt Devine, we can only assume, is in Disney. We do not know where he is, but the smart money is on Disney. I'm joined by my co-host, Ian Hartitz. Ian, what's going on, man? Happy to do the show with you today.
Good to do a show. You, Britt, couldn't handle the heat. You know, we bring a lot of energy on these Fridays. Some guys just can't handle the big league. So I hope Britt is having a good time, whatever he is doing. But excited to talk to you, Andy. Got a interesting slate ahead of us. We were talking before the show. Don't have as much kind of easy value as we're used to. Maybe that will help us out in the long run. Who knows? At a minimum, we do not have to worry about 5+ games being heavily influenced by the weather. So at least we have that going for us this week.
Yeah, and then we have, I was watching the Week 8 show, and Britt's giving out these Rams bets, these Chargers bets. His usage rate was really high that week. Maybe they just wanted someone to come in to distribute a little more to you, Ian. So maybe that's why they brought me in. I don't know. So like Week 9, yeah, it's tough. We were talking cheap stuff, not much cheap stuff. There's plenty of good options to spend up on. Especially running back has like Cook and Edmonds. We'll get to all this stuff, but it's tough to fit everybody we want. So I'm happy to talk through all this with you. Let's talk about your manifesto, your Mismatch Manifesto over on Pro Football Focus. For people who are new to the show, maybe new to your work, just give them like kind of a brief rundown of what you try to accomplish there. It's one of my favorite articles. You really get into the nitty gritty of stuff. A lot of information that you can't find in other spots. So I certainly love reading it on a weekly basis. So tell everyone kind of what you try to do there, and then I'll let you just go right into kind of some stuff you're starting to look for.
Yeah, appreciate that. So the whole kind of idea and goal with this article is just, when we talk about matchups in football, it's always like, okay, this running back has a good matchup because he has the third best run blocking offensive line. They're facing the 27th ranked, defensive line against the run. But it's always a two-way street. So what I've done is I just combine these metrics, the same thing, yards before contact allowed versus, what they have, explosive pass rate allowed versus what they have. Combine those metrics, and that way you can kind of see around the league. Okay, now we have one number that can help show comparatively how good of a matchup is. And also by doing that, it lets a really good offense, even if they're facing a pretty okay defense, we'll see that number still be high enough, and you can feel more confident with the offense overcoming it. So basically, a one-way street to kind of look at matchups in a way that we all pretty much do anyway. Though some conditional formatting on there makes it cleaner for everyone. So without further ado, looking this week at offenses that are really set up well to create explosive plays through the air. We know those big plays are what we're looking for in fantasy football, and I think we got some guys this week that can supply it. For what it's worth, Aaron Rodgers was popping, as someone that could definitely get it going. We saw that come to fruition. The other guys this week that could be set up for success through the air: Deshaun Watson, Kirk Cousins, and Drew Lock. So a little bit surprising to see Lock there. I think we'll talk a little bit more about him when we see, some of the DraftKings stuff and potential tournament plays. And also we have Matthew Stafford, if he's available on Sunday, someone else in a good position. So a lot of these guys, Cousins, even Stafford to some extent, we do have to wonder, is the volume going to be there? We know they're efficient, but sometimes it's too much of a run-first offense. But I do think, Lions and Vikings, and then also that to a lesser extent with Lutton under center, Texans, Jaguars could be games where we see some big plays going on both sides of the ball. And then just guys that real quickly could be struggling a little bit. Kyle Allen, which we know he can struggle against pretty much anyone. Same thing goes with Nick Foles. But Drew Brees also someone popping up. And I know this game's off the main slate and we're just talking DFS, but truly everyone, I have Brees as my QB 15 this week. That even feels a little bit generous. If you're able to find, even a decent streamer to go ahead of Brees in this matchup against the Buccaneers, I would do so.
Yeah, some of those names you talked about, we're going to maybe have to dip down in both formats at quarterback. So I'm excited to hear you talk a little bit more in depth at some of those guys you're looking on the cheap end, because part of me wants to say that I want to get the skill position guys in, the Cooks, the Edmonds, the Keenan Allens, those guys. But man, the money goes away fast when you start putting those guys in. So usually it's a slate that you want to spend down a quarterback, or usually you want to spend down a quarterback in cash games just so you can spend those guys. But I feel like the pricing is just a little bit tighter. So yeah, we'll get into that. Another thing you look at here that is important is the pace. So take me through some of the games here that you're looking at as far as pace, because I think that's obviously, more plays there are, the more opportunities for fantasy points, and you obviously take it a little more detailed than that. So take me through some stuff you're looking at here from a pace perspective.
You said it, man. So pretty much the Cowboys have been operating at the league's fastest pace all season long. Even though Dak is out, they haven't exactly slowed things down a lot, which you would think that, hey, we don't have Dak, we don't have Andy Dalton. Maybe you could take a different offensive approach. Haven't quite seen that. And maybe that does explain why the Cowboys continue to look like, probably the single worst offense in the league since Dak Prescott has gone down. When you don't try to change your offense to fit your, players' own talents, that's the kind of stuff you get. And that's also why we see Braxton Berrios getting, 11 targets for the Jets, because some coaches just will not change their offenses to try to fit their players' talents. That's what we're seeing there. But in this case, again, Cowboys are always popping up in this because they do have just by far the league's highest pace. Pittsburgh Steelers at number 12. So, we do wonder, it's a situation kind of like we were wondering with the Chiefs last few weeks. How long can Pittsburgh stay in this game before it becomes a rout? And can, we get just enough overall play volume for the guys? But I think, considering how fast the Cowboys do move the ball, we should, expect the Steelers to be a little bit better off than they might otherwise be. Packers and 49ers, on the other hand, that game already happened, but that was popping as the slowest pace game. And then Lions Viking is one that's also looking a little bit slow. So situation where, I know we got two good offenses going back and forth there in terms of the explosive passing, but might not have the overall play volume we're looking for. So, like anything we're going over here, it's one piece of the puzzle, but I do think, in general, you definitely want to target the higher pace matchups.
So moving on to another point here on your article is pressure. And I know, like last week, as far as like picking defenses, I kept landing on cheap defenses because I needed to save money, and it's just such a high variance position anyways that I luckily landed on the Dolphins, and which basically single-handedly led me to cash in my cash games, just because I had Kareem Hunt, I had Tyler Lockett, things like that. That brought me down a little bit. But talk to me a little bit about your pressure chart here, because if there's anything we can take away from some of this information, I'm hoping something sticks out from a cheap defense perspective, or if there's something that you really like that's an expensive defense that's going to just say, I'm going to pay up for this no matter what, just because I think the spot is so good. What are you seeing here as far as pressure rates?
Yeah, Daniel Jones is the one that's sticking out, and he's doing it pretty much every week, and he has been the most pressure quarterback in the league this year. Only the Giants and Jets have allowed pressure rates above 40% on the offensive line. So, even if they weren't facing, a good defensive line, I think we'd see, a lot of red there for the Giants. But they are facing this Washington football team defensive line. And, Washington, they've been bad for so long now. They just have a plethora of, just monsters on that front. Chase Young, Montez Sweat, Jonathan Allen, Deron Payne. It's one guy after another. Ryan freaking Kerrigan can barely get enough snaps these days, and that's why he was out there requesting trade before the deadline. So, we saw it in week 1 against the Eagles, and we saw it against the Cowboys before the Washington bye. This defensive line is truly good enough to take over games. I like, the thought of going with them. Maybe Antonio Gibson post-buy stack as a way, open yourself up to a little bit cheaper lineup destruction. Obviously, Pittsburgh Steelers against the Cowboys, if you're able to pay up for, I think, what the most expensive defense maybe we've ever seen on DraftKings, if you're able to do that, makes sense. Steelers have the single best pressure rate we have seen from a defense in our PFF database. So, they are elite at that, and we know that's the Cowboys' biggest problem. And then otherwise, Seattle is looking like Russell Wilson could be under pressure. He's one of these guys, though, him and Deshaun Watson, even Lamar Jackson, like they pop a little bit in the pressure rate, but we know these guys can get away from it as well. So it's not as big of a problem as it might be for more of a statuesque quarterback. The concern could be with Drew Lock here. And again, it's, we're going to talk about Drew Lock more later in this Broncos offense. They're so cheap that I think it does still warrant exposure, but you can see where this thing would go south in a hurry. So while I do like, the Broncos passing offense on the other side of the coin, I don't mind getting some exposure in different lineups to the Falcons defense, because with Drew Lock, man, I feel like he's either going to give us his, third usable performance, or it's going to be the train wreck that we've kind of seen the rest of the time. So if it is a situation where you think a lot of GPP lineups are actually starting to go towards the Broncos route, I think, going a little bit contrarian Falcons, the defense and special teams could pop off just by virtue of Lock making enough mistakes in his own right.
Yeah, and I think with that game, being in the Dome in Atlanta too, as we get further along in the colder months, I think those types of games are going to just kind of naturally inflate ownership a little bit on those teams, especially when, like you said, with Denver's a cheap price tag. So maybe a good way to leverage the field on that one. Moving on down to you have combined yards before contact for rush, basically, and this is one of my favorite parts 3, just because if nothing else, you're looking at like, for me, I like using our projections, and then when you take a chart like yours, you have something that's just a little more detailed that can kind of add some context and add some color to these projection systems. And I just think it's not accurately captured as much as it should be in the DFS industry. That's why this is one of my favorite things to look at. So from that perspective, who's kind of popping off here for some of these running backs?
Yeah, so looking at the chart, we got the Cardinals. And so I made a change to the chart this week. In the past, I've been using team-wide yards before contact, but I was looking at the rankings and I saw the Giants were a top 10 offense in yards before contact per rush. And I was like, hold on, that's not right. I've watched this offensive line all year. We saw Saquon, Freeman. No one can run behind this. What's going on? I realized it's because Daniel Jones on some of these, 50, 60-yard runs he's popped off, he has not been touched the whole way. So I made sure to take only running back yards before contact. So in some offenses like the Cardinals, who are popping off with the single best matchup by far. We've seen, Kyler Murray racking up a bunch of yards before contact, but it's also been the run game. I made that adjustment, and the Giants went from a top 10 offense in this to the third worst in the entire league. So I feel more confident about these numbers in terms of running backs now. And so Cardinals, James Conner and the Steelers, man, talking about, I just don't see a scenario where James Conner busts this week. With the Steelers wide receivers, we have a bunch of questions with volume. Which one is Ben going to pick this week? And to the Cowboys, small defensive credit. We've seen that pass rush turn up a little bit in the last few weeks, and passing offenses haven't just been going nuclear week after week. I don't think it's necessarily because their secondary is good. It's more because their run defense is just so bad that teams don't even have to really try to go through the air. So I think James Conner, if you're able to get up to him, or just, if you want to go down from some of the really high price backs to Conner, I think that makes sense. We've seen him playing much more of, a true 3-down role over the past few weeks. So love Conner in that spot. And then also the other guy kind of popping out that I think is a little bit week 8 Dalvin Cook-esque is Derrick Henry. Like, look, I understand the Bears aren't the easiest matchup, but you look at the kind of stats behind the scenes, and they actually have the 5th worst defense in yards before contact allowed per rush. So they're good overall. It's not a smash spot by any stretch of the imagination, but as was the case, I understand Dalvin Cook versus the Packers last week, maybe a little more clear about the injury stuff. Either way, when you have Derrick Henry versus anybody, he has that chance to just put together 1 or 2 big runs, and he's winning the whole slate. So I don't think, particularly with this game happening in Tennessee, maybe this matchup is as concerning as we should be treating it. Otherwise, comfortable going to Derrick Henry. And then quickly, just guys that aren't set up for success. Cowboys, if it's Zeke there, again, don't need to break this one down too far. I think everyone knows that's a tough matchup. But also the Buccaneers, Uncle Lenny, if you're thinking about playing him in season long, just realize it's a tough spot against the Saints. And then also David Montgomery versus the Titans, someone that gets a ton of, just kind of hate throughout the industry, I feel like. But only the Panthers have averaged fewer yards before contact than the Bears this season. Montgomery has the most broken tackles in the league. So I'm not saying he's going to go off this week or anything, but cut the guy a little bit of slack when you see probably another, 15 carry for 60-yard performance.
A couple of things there. Don't think I didn't notice on that week 8 show that you were all over Dalvin Cook. So I hope the people watching followed your lead there. And when I'm pulling up the the projected ownership over here in lineup HQ on RotoGrinders, and Connor's like, there's the Cook and Edmonds and obviously we have Kenyon Drake assumed out, hasn't been officially rolled out yet, but I think he's doubtful. So we have Cook and Edmonds clear leaders in ownership here, and then Connor's right there, and then Henry's right there. Both two guys I know you just mentioned there. So taking ownership into consideration, I really like that. I want to go back to your one last thing here on your manifesto, and that's the EPA, the expected points allowed, which I don't think a lot of people use. I know you like to layer this in a little bit with some over/under bets and whatnot. When I was looking to put my bet in for what we were going to talk about in a few minutes here for like our favorite bets of the week, I kind of used your chart as like the stamp of approval too, because I had one I kind of liked, and then I saw a bunch of green popping up over here on your chart. So talk to me about the expected points allowed per play, and how you filter this into everything.
Yeah, so you're just looking at EPA per play, taking it from the offense and the defensive side of the ball. And yeah, when you see a matchup with 2 green teams, it was an over/under that was working a lot better earlier in the year. Last week, we really saw a tank. A lot of that had to do with the weather and some of these games with backup quarterbacks in there. So look, early on in the season, it was hitting enough to almost blindly bet these games with 2 green offenses and, just pick up the money come Monday morning. But now, again, like most of these charts, piece of the puzzle, don't, fully be going out on one thing. But to your point, it is good validation to kind of show which offenses are in an overall good spot and which ones might not be. Because you see, like the Jaguars, for instance, like this has not been a dominant offense by any stretch. And we are concerned with Jake Luton. But this Texas defense has been, so mediocre throughout the year that I'm not afraid of, stacking the Texans offense and then bringing it back with a James Robinson or with a Laviska Shenault, because I do think there's enough there from the Texans defense being bad enough to warrant exposure. So, you look at the games, Texans, Jaguars, Lions, Vikings, Bears, Titans, Seahawks, Bills, Raiders, Chargers, and Dolphins, Cardinals to a much lesser extent. That's still kind of being influenced by the Fitzpatrick thing. But you look at those games, those are the matchups where we should have some confidence that both offenses can move the ball. And, we see again and again, I feel like with these tournament winning lineups, it's almost always, a stack with one team, but they always bring it back with at least one other guy from the side. So, you do want to target these high scoring matchups. Just make sure you realize that, it helps a lot to be able to have an offense putting up the points that you're going to center the lineup around, but also an offense on the other side of the ball that you can at least find one or two guys you can trust. So I would just say, yeah, man. And, don't blindly bet the over-unders, but if you see a situation where, it is a little bit lower than you might think, last week, one of my bets of the week was the Lions game where we had this, everything going for them. I do think it's a good way to just ensure that the bet's where you want it to be.
Yeah, well, that went to like 62 points. What was that line at that week or last week? Was that
49 and
50?
a half. Yeah,
Ooh,
it was
that was
low.
you had that one. You had that one quick. All right. Before we get into our bets for this week, which is a good transition from your EPA chart, I just want to mention to everybody who is not aware of the single entry, the RotoGrinders single entry series on FanDuel. We have it going again this week. I know it started in week 6, but if you haven't got in it yet, you can still get in it because it takes your top 4 combined scores each week, and we have it at 3 different price tiers, depending on, if you can obviously play all 3 if you want, but we have it at $5, it's at $33, and it's at $100. So get into those. It takes your top 4 combined scores each from however many weeks you play it from each tier, and then the top 2 finishers in each tier advance to a 6-man 20K final. So hop in there. I know there's plenty of spots left. We're recording this on Friday afternoon, plenty of spots left to get in there. So this is a reminder for the single entry series on FanDuel presented by RotoGrinders. Hop in there right away. All right, so let's get over to the bets of the week. I'm going to start off because I want to talk about the one that I just mentioned a little bit ago. I like the Houston-Jacksonville. I like the Houston-Jacksonville over-under. I like the over. It's 50.5 last I looked. I know these teams are bad. I know they're both 1-6 or 1 whatever. When I pull up Gridiron IQ and I go down here to identity, as you can see here, this is one of our tools on RotoGrinders. We have Jacksonville ranks first in pass percentage. Houston ranks second in pass percentage. I know they play from behind a lot. I know that matters, but I think that's also just kind of who these teams are. And you get this at 50.5. I think that line is a little deflated just because Minshew's out. I still think Luton can put up points at least enough to do their part. So I kind of like the 50.5 over on Houston and Jacksonville. Ian, what are you looking at for your bet or bets of the week?
Yeah, I like that call, man. That's what I was just talking about here with that Jacksonville side. Like, I understand Luton's there. He's not Minshew, and Minshew has been able to put up points, even though he hasn't, he's turned out to be much, more average, I think, than some people are hoping. But yeah, man, 2 bad defenses. I think it's definitely a situation we could expect those points. I got 3 actual spreads that I'm looking at this week. I think the Ravens at -1.5, a little bit of an overreaction of that loss against the Steelers. That, hey, look, they had the ball, I think that the 5 and then at the 23-yard line, the last 2 drives of the game, that game could have easily gone the Ravens direction. I understand no Stanley, no Humphrey. Like, they got some injuries to deal with, but this Colts team, I'm still just not sure if they really are in that true upper class with the Ravens. The Ravens' only losses this year are to the Chiefs and the Steelers. Like, it's okay, everyone. Lamar hasn't been quite the same world beater, still been pretty darn good. And I don't have enough confidence in this Colts offense moving the ball, even against a lesser version of the Ravens defense to kind of just, again, 1.5 points, sign me up there. So I just think that line is a little bit too low. Raiders +1. I was shocked to see the Chargers even open up as a favorite this week. I just don't really know. Look, Justin Herbert's been playing some good ball, but the Chargers are still charging, when it gets down to the 4th quarter, seemingly all these games. So I know that's not a reason to just fully bet against them. They're a good team and everything, but how many more injuries can this defense take and still be a good unit? I mean, they lost Derwin James. Somehow didn't matter. They lost Chris Harris. Somehow didn't really matter. But now Joey Bosa has started the week off with back-to-back DMPs. Remains in concussion protocol. Looks like he is treading towards missing this game. So, like the Chargers, they have so much talent there, and we see what Herbert can do with that offense. But now you take away their top three by far most important players on defense. Maybe not. Okay, Hayward's probably more important than Harris. Either way, Bosa and Derwin James being out is just absolutely huge. I think the Raiders, they went into Arrowhead, had an incredibly impressive victory. We had the bye week to forget about that a little bit. Tough matchup against the Buccaneers, and then just a weather typhoon game last week against the Browns that they managed to win, to their credit. But truly, I think this Raiders passing game, they're throwing the ball downfield more often. Carr's having, in my opinion, the best season of his career. They got a little bit, we were talking about this before the game, and you mentioned how they might have a little extra, pissed off motivation storyline going for them there with the stuff with the league sanctions. So I just think a lot of things are turning up the Raiders, and even, removing all that, I do just think they're a better offense, better overall team. So love Herbert. And, we've seen just week after week with these Chargers games, totals usually ending in the 60s. So I'm not saying don't, go the well with these Chargers guys in DFS, but I just think this is a game the Raiders should be favored to win. The fact they're not, I am happy to, bet them at +1. And last one, I got the Cardinals at -4.5. Look, Tua looked awful last week, and credit to him. It's a great story that he came back from the injury and stuff, and he's out there. But more and more with these reports, initially it was like people were almost saying, great job, Brian Flores. The Dolphins are competitive. They're bringing in Tua so they can win more. More and more reports, man, I don't think that's the case at all, because Ryan Fitzpatrick was playing great before he got pulled. They put Tua in directly after the bye, which seems like, a general kind of good time to put in your rookie QB. And now we got reports coming out from Adam Schefter, one of the best, guys in the business at what he does, if not the best. He is the best. And he's saying now the Dolphins aren't necessarily attached to Tua in the 2021, and they're using this as an addition because they're going to have those high-end Texans picks to potentially, make a deal to get a quarterback they want. So, more and more we're seeing this was not a move designed to put the better quarterback in necessarily. It's a smart move to try to figure out what you have in Tua right now, but we need to evaluate what this Dolphins offense looks like with Tua. In the 1 week against Aaron Donald, the company, not a good matchup, but we saw pretty much nothing, and it was a much more dumbed down version of this Dolphins offense. Only a 5-yard average target depth. Truly, we're just trying to throw screens out there and stuff, and couldn't even really do that at a high percentage throughout the game. So, Cardinals defense has impressed a lot. The Dolphins defense has been great since they got Byron Jones back. I get that. But the Cardinals, at least we know, are at worst above average on both sides of the ball. We cannot say that by any extent for the Dolphins, going from Florida, pretty much across the country to Arizona. I just think this is, too much too soon for Tua and company. Give me Kyler in the Cardinals -4.5.
Love it. You sold me on all those. We were talking about the Raiders before the show, and yeah, I had a feeling you're going to go there with your bet, and I can't agree more on that one. Real quick before we get into the position stuff, I showed everybody Gridiron IQ over here on the share screen. I want to touch on some injuries real quick beforehand, but for those of you watching who are not subscribers to RotoGrinders and want to, we're offering $5 off your first month if you sign up via the link that I believe our producer Devin just put into the chat. So that is rotogrinders.com/media/PFF for Pro Football Focus, rotogrinders.com/media/PFF. That gets you $5 off your first month at RotoGrinders. So you have this Gridiron IQ, which I just use all the time. We have a premium usage app that you can use. We have, I mentioned the ownership over here a little bit ago. You have all sorts of stuff that gets released every day of the week. We have a premium content schedule that has all that listed. And then I just pulled up here the injury report, the situation room. We have this for NBA too. We have it for NFL here, and just we'll use this as kind of a transition into when we start talking about positions. Like we're looking at some, obviously everyone's expecting McCaffrey's back. I always sort here at the impact rating just because it gives us, the most important one. So everyone's expecting McCaffrey back, which takes Mike Davis out of the equation. We have Drake listed as doubtful. Carson, if he doesn't play, you can maybe look at some DJ Dallas again. We have Calvin Ridley is questionable. Is probably the biggest one who's truly questionable. We just really don't know what's going to happen there. That might open up Hurst at tight end. We need some savings there. That's pretty much it. Galladay's doubtful. We got the Stafford situation. We'll probably talk about that at quarterback, because if Stafford can't make it back on Sunday, maybe we're looking at a little Chase Daniel. Maybe that's our way to some salary relief to pay up for all these skill guys. So let's move into quarterback here. We were discussing just briefly, on our sheet beforehand of who we like for cash games at quarterback. I think it's, as of right now, I think the position in general just seems a little bit tighter than normal. I feel like they usually have a little more little more leeway down there at the bottom, like when you're looking at that high 5K range, low 6K range. But I just don't see anybody I want to get who's like kind of, in the low sixes. Like if I can just go up a couple $100 and get this like Josh Allen, if I can get this Deshaun Watson, that's the tier I'm shopping in. I'm kind of leading Josh Allen just because of the rushing. I think that stabilizes the floor a little bit. I of course love Watson too. That's kind of what I'm looking at in cash games, at least. What are you looking at the quarterback position in cash games?
Yeah, I think, getting Allen's certainly fair. Obviously has turned down a little bit since the start of the year, but what people need to realize is, look, the verdict's still out on if Josh Allen's going to be a great real life quarterback, but we have 3 years of evidence that dude is a fantastic fantasy football quarterback, and playing against the Seahawks defense that, hey, they're getting Jamal Adams back. That's good and everything, but hey, we have bunches of film of Julian Edelman cooking Jamal Adams in man-on-man coverage from that week 2 game against the Patriots. I think the bigger issue for the Seahawks is they have, the single worst defense this year in pressure rate. So add whoever you want there in the secondary. If they can't get to the quarterback, it's going to be a problem. I like that call. I would just say, if you want to be able to get up to Deshaun Watson, I think you can. Kind of lost in the fact this year that the Texans have been, awful from a win-loss standpoint. It's the fact that Deshaun Watson has actually been a better version of himself in fantasy land than we saw over these past 2 years. He averaged the most points of his career, just in terms of fantasy points, and as a rookie. But literally in 2020, he's averaging more fantasy points per game than he did in 2019 or 2018. And okay, we didn't see the hottest start in the year, but now against this Jaguars defense, that again, we should just be targeting with reckless abandon anytime we can get this matchup, and the public isn't all over it. Coming off a bye, Will Fuller, potential squeaky wheel after they were trying to trade him. Brandon Cooks. I feel like we have a much better grip on this Texans offense at this point, and we see them play generally better ball in recent weeks. So I'm fine going up to Deshaun Watson if you can with GPPs. So I think the two kind of fun games you could look to target that could be back and forth shootouts. The Broncos with Drew Lock. You said before, man, we just don't have much value everywhere. So if we can get it with our quarterback and pass catchers, this could help us get up to running backs that we want in certain lineups. So Drew Lock at only 5,200. You can get Jerry Jeudy, who I believe is only 4,700, against a Falcons defense that maybe isn't awful, but they're still awfully banged up. And I think, they are still in that tier of the Jaguars, even if the Jaguars are worse. Of, if we can play guys against them, that's great, because even if the Falcons are a little bit better in some of these defenses, their offense is much better, which means we can expect more of a, just a back and forth shootout kind of flow to the game. So we like that. And then also I would just say Derek Carr against this Bosa-less Chargers defense. I mean, don't count out this dude and what the passing game can do. And I would just say that with Bryan Edwards coming back this week, most likely, the reason why Nelson Aguilar has been playing so much is because of Bryan Edwards being out. So Aguilar has been playing great football this year. I don't think he's necessarily going to hit the bench right away, but just realize if you do want to go with these Derek Carr stacks, you're obviously going Carr and Waller, but I really would lean towards Henry Ruggs over Aguilar, because with Bryan Edwards coming back, I mean, look, they thought really highly of him. He was starting the year, and Aguilar's played well though, so I don't think he's going to be benched. I think we could see Edwards and Aguilar splitting things up a little bit. Ruggs, first wide receiver in the entire draft, and the things he's done to help kind of open up that field with his speed have been apparent. So I don't think he's going anywhere. But Carr, Waller, Henry Ruggs stacks, sign me up, man.
So we got a question from someone in the YouTube chat. I want to run it by you. It's from, apologies if I mispronounce this. It's from Pranav Pradhan. You talked about Drew Lock and GBPs. We've been talking about we need to save too. He wants to know, would you play Drew Lock in cash games? Is that something you do on this slate? As from what we know right now, is that something you do in cash games on this slate, Ian?
No, not quite. I just think there's a legit, like 5-point floor here whenever Drew Lock is there. He used to have some rushing, or he showed some rushing kind of floor in 2019, but we just really haven't seen that in 2020, particularly coming back from the injury. And look, he was good last week, and last year he had a game against the Texans where he was good. His 8 other starts, he's like not thrown multiple touchdowns. I believe he's been under 200 yards in like 6 of them. So the floor is just so low with him that I don't think he's quite cash game viable. If you want to put like Jeudy in there, I think that's a little bit more reasonable, but going all the way down to Lock, I don't think so. Derek Carr, I'd be a little bit more willing to play in cash game lineups. So at 5,700, I'd say that's the lowest I'd be willing to go for a cash game QB.
Good call. Before we transition to running back, I just want to mention something I like for GPPs. I think I like Kyler Murray for a couple of reasons. Obviously, I mean, he has one of the higher ceilings at the position. We got him for the 3rd highest ceiling if you look at our RotoGrinders projections. I think if people decide to pay way up here, I think you have Russ at $200 less. I think people are going to play Russ like, I can sack with Lockett, I can sack with Metcalf. I don't think people are going to pay up for Murray when they're deciding to pay up. We have him at, on DraftKings, we have him at 5.1% projected ownership as of right now. I also think with the Edmonds ownership and how popular he's going to be. I think if you do like a mini Kyler Hopkins stack, little mini stack of those two guys, I think that's a good way to leverage a little Edmonds ownership. So those are my thoughts on in GPPs for quarterbacks. Now let's move it over to running backs, and there's going to be some very familiar names that people have probably heard all week already. You have Dalvin Cook is someone I think he's going to be my priority in cash games at any position. You think no Kamara on the slate, Aaron Jones, he played last night, McCaffrey, price is right, but we're maybe a little uncertain on the usage. Curious to hear your thoughts on that, by the way. Zeke's not Zeke anymore, mainly because of the offense. Henry's going up against the Bears, although there's reason to like him, which you've already mentioned, and we should talk about even more. So for me in cash games, I think I'm going to prioritize Cook. I think as far as like even just projections from flex positions overall, I think we have him like almost about 2.5, 3 points higher than the next projected guy. So he's going to be a priority for me in cash games. Running back, what about you, Ian?
Yeah, so looking at cash games, I want James Conner, man. If you can get up to those guys as well, that's great. But to me, there just isn't another running back on the slate that we can feel better about getting 100+ yards and multiple touchdowns. I mean, look, we got to keep the show within 60 minutes, man. If we wanted to list every single running back that has put together like their season high game against the Cowboys this year, we would be here far too long. So, I mean, it was pretty funny, man, listening to like last Sunday night's broadcast against the Eagles. I mean, Collinsworth was like almost taken aback talking about this run defense. He's like, you just don't see this many explosive plays happening on the ground against one defense so consistently. That has been the case. They're getting healthier. They got Randy Gregory back. He's been helping with the pass rush. Leighton Vander Esch is there. But, you throw in the reality that, okay, let's say the Cowboys defense does play great and they, play better than we have seen all year and they make life tough. Okay, they're not going to be able to move the ball, man. So we're going to see like the most positive game script possible for this Pittsburgh offense, likely getting the ball, in good field position all game. And like the problems I have with James Conner earlier in the year were that his role he was scoring touchdowns, but it was more of this Kenyon Drake, David Johnson role. He was playing, 60, 70% snaps with 20 touches a game. That was fine. But with the old 2018 and, kind of 2014 and 2018 Steelers role was 80, 90% snaps and like freaking 30 touches or until the wheels fall off the wagon. That's what we saw with Le'Veon for all those years, Connor, even D'Angelo Williams. They have gotten back to that over the past 2 weeks. So, Connor, we're looking at, a minimum, I think, projected touch workload of 20. I think he's certainly going to clear 100. And I think, if he doesn't find the end zone at least once, I would be surprised. So give me James Conner in cash and GPP lineups alike. With GPP, I think Justin Jackson at 4,900 is interesting. It's been a situation with this Chargers backfield where Troy Maine Pope came out of nowhere last week, kind of relegated Josh Kelly to, more of a third RB role. We don't know what that situation is going to be, but throughout all this, Justin Jackson's role has not changed. He's the lead guy, primary pass down back. And again, in this Chargers Raiders game where, it could shoot out. And I think he is involved enough as a receiver. You can go, Herbert, Keenan, Jackson, if you don't want to, double up with Keenan or Mike or Keenan and Hunter Henry or whatever. So I like Jackson here. And then last two, I would say one, mentioned before at the yards before contact where Derrick Henry, he just fits that week 8 Dalvin Cook mold where I understand like why people are going to play Christian McCaffrey, Dalvin Cook, James Robinson, probably above Derrick Henry, and they'll have higher ownership potentially. But, it's Derrick Henry. Anytime this guy is available, regardless of the matchup, we got to realize he has that tournament winning upside. So I know you guys were mentioning that he does still have a little bit higher ownership. Just looking across the industry a little bit, PFF Fantasy Labs, I am seeing him, under 5% potentially. So just realize, anytime you have a good amount of tournament lineup exposure and you have a situation where Derrick Henry could be under owned, particularly as you get into the winter months, make sure you're not going, completely zero with Henry. Last point, I would say Antonio Gibson at 5,800. Mentioned before that, Washington football defense against the Giants. I think stacking them with Gibson would be great. Maybe, just maybe after this bye, we've finally seen JD McKissick, integrated out of this offense a little bit. Either way, though, Gibson's already kind of getting this 12 to 15 rushes and 5 target workload. We saw it work against the Cowboys. Giants aren't as bad as the defense as the Cowboys, but I still think, Gibson, talented guy, already with solid workload, and he has the potential to see that shoot up. So a situation where I wouldn't quite trust him in cash, but I think that's the exact type of GPP target we should be going for.
Yeah, and keep refreshing this. As we get closer to Sunday, everybody, if you're using the lineup HQ projected ownership, I wouldn't be surprised at all to see the Henry ownership just go down a little bit, especially because I mentioned using stats like we have in Gridiron IQ. You look at some of these things and how good Chicago is against the run in that regard. But then that's why I like looking at articles like yours when I put for my GPP play. I put Derrick Henry, and I wanted you to talk about him. But the reason why I put him in there is strictly because of what you mentioned in the article. And you have the Bears the second worst defense and explosive run play rate allowed. So and is there a more matchup proof guy in the league than Derrick Henry?
Exactly.
So probably not. So that's exactly why you play guys like that, and you take your 25 rushes for 185 yards and 2 touchdowns, and you take that to the bank. So I'm on board there with you on Derrick Henry. So I don't think many people argue with that one. So let's move over to wide receiver now. I think we got a decent amount of time left, so we can touch on some wide receivers here. Cash games again. As I mentioned kind of at the top of the show, why things start getting a little uncomfortable. I mentioned like a 7K quarterback. I mentioned Dalvin Cook, making him a priority. Now I'm going to talk about Keenan Allen being a priority for me in cash games. He's 7K. I think he left. I think it was the Week 5 game. He left a little pretty early in that game with back spasms. In the other, I believe, 6 games, in the 6 healthy games he's had this year, basically he's had basically a 34% market share of targets for that team. That would lead the entire league. It's even ahead of Devontae Adams, DeAndre Hopkins, guys like that. So I think Keenan Allen just still far too underpriced for his role. He's 7K on DraftKings, and I think that's just too cheap. And then you also have the fact that he's going up against the Raiders, who are one of the worst defenses in the league against the pass. So I still like Keenan Allen. I think the price is too cheap. Take me through what you're starting with in cash games, a wide receiver, and as well as GPPs as well.
Yeah, so it's going to, obviously depend on who you decide to go with your cash game quarterback, who you're trying to stack them around with. I mentioned before, I do like Deshaun Watson. So Will Fuller, it's always Will Fuller week in 2020, except for week 2, but that's almost in the, full rearview mirror now. So at 6,800, I think that we can go back to the well with him. We have seen, though, in recent weeks, Brandon Cooks, he's not going away. He had the goose egg, and ever since then, he's been a lot more involved in the offense. So again, just realize that Deshaun Watson, inexplicably playing better than ever without Hopkins. I think it's kind of a similar situation as to what we saw with the Panthers when they were playing better without McCaffrey. Look, Hopkins, this dude is anyone's idea of a top 3 talent at the position in the entire league. Any offense would obviously want DeAndre Hopkins in their 3 wide receiver sets. Let him be your number 1 wide receiver. No one's saying that isn't the point, but you have a situation now where, how many years was Hopkins the only number 1 receiver with the Texans, and Fuller would be hurt and there's just no one else to throw to? So now the fact that Watson has Fuller, Cooks, Cobb's doing good things. He has some good receiving backs. He's just been able to spread the ball out more, not be quite as predictable. Even though they could be predictable with Hopkins and still have plenty of success. I just think, not having the offense flow as exclusively through one guy, as we saw the Panthers passing him doing with McCaffrey, just helps, your talents be put in a little bit better positions, I think, when the defense doesn't know exactly what's coming every time. So, Watson with Fuller and Cooks, I think makes a lot of sense. And I also think Adam Thielen at 6,700 is just money in the bank at this point. I realized last week, kind of a down week for both him and Justin Jefferson, but that was only because Kirk Cousins threw the ball 14 times. So, hey, that is in his range of outcomes, unfortunately, but Thielen throughout all this kind of turnover with the Vikings this season, he's remained their number 1 guy. And, I've been treating him as a top 10 receiver throughout the offseason and into now. So just don't forget that. And I think at 6,700, he's not going to be, the just off the radar guy or anything like that. But just realizing, against this Lions defense, I don't think anybody can guard him. I'd be surprised if he doesn't find the end zone in this one. And I would just say for GPPs, mentioned before, if I want to go Drew Lock with Jerry Jeudy and Tim Patrick, who has been practicing this week with the hamstring injury, if he's active, don't be afraid to stack him up with both. Tim Patrick's playing some good ball. I do think Judy's better. This dude's route running is just on another plane of existence sometimes. But, Patrick and Jeudy, it's not often you can stack your quarterback with his top 2 receivers and still have 2 receivers under 5K. So I just think that allows you to get up to a bunch of running backs. And then just some other quick guys. Marquise Brown, 6,000. He's in freaking the Colts dome, and I believe it was Rich Rebar, awesome fantasy analyst. He was pointing out Lamar Jackson's only played, I think it's 6 games on non just grass turf in the NFL. So not a huge correlation here, but it would make sense if Lamar and Marquise Brown really get that speed flying on that fast track. And again, Colts defense, hey, they're good, but I think as we saw last week with Matthew Stafford going for over 300 yards and 3 touchdowns, not exactly a defense we need to fear and just fade guys just because. So Marquise Brown, awesome squeaky wheel spot. And I would just point out that Calvin Ridley's out. We got Christian Blake sitting there at the stone cold 3,000. If you really want to save some cash, I think he is viable. And then finally, with this, I'm talking about all these Texans guys. I think the Jaguars player, if you can't get all the way up to James Robinson, which I understand, Laviska Shenault at 4,200. This could be a nice week for him because Jake Luton, we don't know much about him, but you look at the advanced stats from his college days, and you start to see kind of the picture of this game manager, a guy that's way more willing to check down than throw deep. So I think Laviska is already someone that's emerged as, their number 2 weapon in the passing game, but it could even, almost rise up above Chark here moving forward if Luton kind of ends up being this guy that's a little bit more afraid to throw the ball downfield. So, you're able to get that Watson, Fuller, Cooks, and bring it back with Laviska. Set us the money now, man. I think we're in business there.
Yeah, I forgot to mention that a little earlier. There's some stuff creeping out of the Jacksonville camp about them wanting to throw more with this guy. So I don't know if that's just coach speak and they're trying to pull the okey doke. But that's another reason I like the over there in that game. Just more passes equals more chances for big plays, but more incomplete passes in the clock stop. So that helps over bets for sure. So. I'm glad you mentioned him, and that I like it. I like Chenault's price, 4,200 on DK, I believe. So good call there. One guy I like for GPPs before I take us to tight ends. I really like Tyreek. I know he had a big game last week, and I know this is like kind of an early run of our ownership projections. But last I looked, we had him at like the 16th highest projection for ownership at wide receiver, and I think we have him like the second or third highest ceiling. And you look at I'm going to start here by salary here. You look at this price range right here. So he's 7,100. Stephon Diggs going to go up against Seattle. Everyone loves receivers against Seattle, obviously. Julio Jones, if Ridley's out, he's 7,200. He's going to be popular. Keenan Allen, 7K. Obviously, already talked about him. He's going to be popular. Then like Lockett, Will Fuller. You talked about him. They're both 6'8". Like even after Tyreek's big game last week, I still don't think people are going to play him. I still don't think people are going to play like Mahomes, Kelsey, Hill together, even after what we just saw them do last week. So I think you get really low ownership on that trio, and I especially like Hill. That's my thoughts on GPPs at wide receiver. Let's take it over to tight end, which, man, I always want to save here in general. I don't think I've got tight end right once this year. In cash games, maybe I got lucky on that Burton week when he's like taking rushing touchdowns. And what was that 2 or 3 weeks ago? I felt I sucked out a little bit on this rushing touchdown, but they've been letting him do that a couple times. So I don't know. Basically, what I'm trying to say here is I don't like anything. I'm sorted by our RotoGrinders value. Waller pops at the top. I'm most likely going to be looking at this like 4K range. Like if Ridley's out, Hurst at 4.1, Henry at 4K. Maybe Noah Fant at 4.6. I'm going to try to go as cheap as possible here when I ultimately build my final cash game lineup. I wish there was someone in like the low 3s that I like, but I am really not seeing it this week. So I'm kind of looking at the 4K range for cash games. What are you thinking, man? I need some help.
It's bad, man. Like you're seeing like Irv Smith popping, under 3K, but nah, I can't go down that low. I like what you said, and I just think Hunter Henry at 4K, Eric Ebron at 4,500. These are also guys I would just keep an eye on. Ebron started playing like an every snap role. I mean, a situation earlier in the year where we thought maybe Vance McDonald would be someone that's just stealing too much work from him for either guy to kind of end up being viable. But I think Ebron, they love him in the red zone just with the size he brings, kind of compared to Deontay, and honestly, just the way Juju's been moving all year. Ebron is kind of one of their more athletic guys out there and just able to kind of cause some problems in matchups against safeties. So Ebron against the Cowboys, I think makes sense. And Hunter Henry, look, I mean, we've seen Donald Parham, Virgil Green, like these random fullbacks, like Justin Herbert's throwing touchdowns to the most random guys. At some point, we're going to see Hunter Henry have himself a nice little game. He's been staying healthy all year, similar to kind of Evan Ingram, where we've always been treating these guys as, upside options at the position. And it's been wild to see their health be okay in 2020 and not to have that production come alongside it. But that's been the reality. But, hey, you look at this matchup against the Raiders, if there is ever a spot for Hunter Henry to, break out of this slump and have a big game, I think it is this week. And then also I would just say, if you really want to try to go cheaper, I think Logan Thomas at 3,700 is pretty viable. I know he's been in this price range for pretty much the whole year, and we've kind of gotten burnt going back to it a few times, but You look under 4K, it's him. It's probably Jimmy Graham at 3,800. And I think that's it in terms of guys that, we can reasonably be expecting 5+ targets for. With Thomas, since Kyle Allen's come under center, we've seen more efficiency. But even with or without Kyle Allen, he's been a guy that they've had out there, for 75% plus of their snaps pretty much every single week of the season. So, to your point, we want plays. We also want guys that are going to be out there playing on those plays. So I think Logan Thomas, is at least a guy that's going to be out there on every single snap. Keep an eye on Cole Kmet for the Bears, because if he is ruled out, Jimmy Graham is actually going to, be flirting with a near every down role and probably more targets than he's used to seeing. So I get it. It's absolutely disgusting. And, I say this now, and it's going to be tough on Saturday when I'm making my lineups to even put Jimmy Graham in myself. But I do think, as we've seen with Aguilar and, Perryman last year, is like, if you remove Jimmy Graham's name from the player pool and just look at his spot and look at his stats and his projected target share, I think you'd be a lot more willing to pick him up if you can just admit that, okay, it's Jimmy Graham. I know you've been burned on this guy, but everything else is right other than his name being Jimmy Graham. So Jimmy Graham, Logan Thomas under 4K, I think are the best cheaper options.
There we go. One thing I'll note on, just from a tournament perspective, we have Waller as the best, using our RotoGrinders value column. We have him as the best value, and we have him with the highest ownership, but he's only at 14.5%. I don't know if that's high for that position. What I'm trying to say is the ownership seems pretty spread out here amongst tight ends. I don't think there's going to be any one person, at least as of now, unless some news breaks or something, that is just really going to command the ownership. So I don't feel like I'm losing out on taking him, because he's only 14% projected ownership. I think as far as tight end at this position, as we've seen this year, there's just so few guys that show even slight winning upside to begin with, like Waller, Kelsey, those guys. I'm fine taking those guys. We're talking about how hard it is to find salary this week, and when it comes down to it, most DFS players, they save at this position. So if that's going to cause guys like Waller and Kelsey to just go slightly lower owned, that's kind of what I've been looking at. And I know you were talking up just the Raiders in general earlier. So the Carr, Waller, maybe throw in, one of the receivers you were mentioning earlier. So I definitely like that route in tournaments. I think we got a few more minutes here. Let's just knock out just a little bit of defense talk. And maybe I'm being selfish here because I don't know who the hell I want to play in any format of defense this week. I know I want to save, but help me out, help the viewers out. What are you looking at? What are you looking at for defense this week? Because, yes, we would love to play the Steelers, but they're 4-9, and I'm pretty sure you mentioned earlier. I think it is fact they are the highest priced defense ever on DraftKings. So yes, 4-9. They will not be in my cash game lineup for sure. But what are you doing here at defense this week?
Pretty tough to get up to 4,900 in this economy. Absolutely, man. But if you want to go down, a little bit to Washington at 3,400, again, mention that Antonio Gibson stack. And I'm not seeing super high projected ownership really with them there. It seems like the team, at least popping out, from I'm looking at, is kind of Houston at 3,100. But there's just, that's not even really all that well coached of a unit. And it's just not all that talented either. So I'm fine kind of going down at the position this week. And the two teams I want to take most of my shots on are the Vikings at 2,400. It'll be a little bit more appealing for sure if Matthew Stafford is out of the picture, obviously, and I think they'll become pretty chalky if we got Chase Daniel under center. But even if not, man, I just think that while the Lions can put up points, we also know they're turnover prone. We also know, the scheme just, anytime an offense is consistently giving Adrian Peterson this much work, we're not going to give them the benefit of the doubt in terms of how the scheme and the coaching is there. So I just think the Vikings defense, while the secondary remains banged up, and, it's been kind of a struggle all year for them, as we saw last week, against the Packers, there's still a well-coached enough team to, come up with some plays. And, while the pressure hasn't been good, and it's not going to get necessarily better without the Neil Hunter coming back. Again, I think Zimmer can do enough against potentially a poorly coached team where there's a fourth cheapest defense on the slate. And that just should not be the case. There's no reason why Jacksonville, the Raiders, even the Giants should be priced higher than the Vikings. So I understand they're not the most appealing play out there. You can poke holes in it, but I just think, relative to their cost, they should be ranked a little bit higher or priced a little bit higher. And then also I think the Falcons at 2,500, they're probably the one I'm leaning towards the most because, again, Drew Lock, while it could turn out well, man, we have far more examples of it not turning out well for Lock this season. I mentioned before in my, the Mismatch Manifesto pressure part, Drew Lock is popping as someone that could be under more pressure than most this week. And, I've gone through and looked at, some of the quarterbacks in the league that, just kind of have the biggest difference in production when they're kept clean versus when they're under pressure. And it's pretty much like Jared Goff and Drew Lock are just popping above almost anyone else as the guys that, when things are right, they can make plays. But the second they get some pressure, we start seeing some bad decisions. So Locke, he does still have more turnover worthy plays than big time throws in his short career. I love the guy. He just drips swag. I love the dancing. I love everything about him, and I hope I'm wrong. But I do think, the Falcons, again, much like the Vikings, to see them, priced in that below 25K range, I just think we could easily see an extra $500 there. So Falcons, Vikings, sign me up.
There we go. There are my cheap defenses for the week. Yeah. If you want some of these, the projected ownership, we got the injury report, the situation room, Gridiron IQ. As I mentioned earlier in the show, if you're just hopping in now, as we're closing things out, we are offering $5 off at RotoGrinders for your first month if you want. It's at hit the link rotogrinders.com/media/PFF. That's our Pro Football Focus. rotogrinders.com/media/PFF for $5 off. You get all these tools that I've kind of been using throughout the show. So, Ian, I think, man, we're out of time. This kind of flew by. I hope I filled in admirably for Britt. If I had more advance notice, I would have worn some Mickey Mouse ears or something to honor him appropriately. But I appreciate doing the show with you, man. I hope I did all right. Anything you want to give to the viewers before I close this out here?
Yeah, bro. I hope our friend Britt is fine. But hey, if he's trying to start a rivalry and he wants to start co-hosting with Mickey, man, you and me might have to start our own brand. So if he's not willing to come showing up these days, we'll see. But yeah, just if everyone, if you like what I have to say, I am truly just trying to provide you with all the information you need to be the best fantasy football player possible. So check out the PFF Fantasy Football Podcast. I bring you new episodes Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Every week, go over every game that I am watching and try to give you the advanced metrics to boot. So good stuff there, and good talking to you, Andy. This was fun, man. Best of luck to everyone in week 9 and beyond.
All right, man. That's Ian. I'm Andy Means. We will see everybody next week. Have a good one.